están atacando el fuerte Fiuna.
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela.
At 10:46 p.m., January 2nd, 2026, Donald John Trump, the 45th and 47th President of the United States of America, gave the order to begin Operation Absolute Resolve. By 3:29 a.m. the following morning, the military forces of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela had been dealt possibly the most humiliating and overwhelming defeat in modern military history. Using a combination of electronic countermeasure craft such as the EA-18G Growler and joint operations by U.S. intelligence agencies such as the CIA, NSA, and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the U.S. forces disabled the power grid in the capital city of Caracas and confounded the Venezuelan military's ability to track U.S. forces by radar.
We watched, we waited, we prepared, we remained patient and professional.
Targeted strikes on Venezuela's anti-air resources followed, paving the way for an extremely low-altitude penetration of Venezuelan airspace by the U.S. Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, very likely alongside the unit's hallmark MH-60L Direct Action Penetrator Blackhawks. Aboard those helicopters were the teams of roughly 24 United States Army's 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta operators, known colloquially as Delta Force. At 2:01 a.m., 1:01 a.m. local time, the 160th made a surprise landing outside Maduro's compound in Caracas. Delta Force operators breached Maduro's compound shortly after, capturing President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. A reported 24 Venezuelan security forces members and 32 Cuban military and police officers, who had apparently been supplementing the Venezuelan forces at the time, were also killed in the assault. U.S. forces suffered only 2 serious casualties and lost no personnel or aircraft during the attack. By the next day, Nicolas Maduro had been transported to New York City to face arraignment on charges of trafficking cocaine, narco-terrorism conspiracy, possession of machine guns and/or destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. While battle damage assessments by both the United States and Venezuela are still ongoing, early reports suggest only a single civilian fatality occurred during the operation. Johanna Rodriguez Sierra, 45, died when a United States AGM-88 series missile, an anti-radar munition fired from fixed-wing air assault platforms like the EA-18G Growler mentioned earlier, damaged her apartment building, killing her and reportedly injuring her daughter. The apartment was apparently located about 500 meters from an anti-aircraft munition storage facility, and why and how the AGM-88 struck the building is currently unknown. A large, indeterminate number of other buildings in the vicinity of targeted military structures were also non-critically harmed, experiencing broken glass and window damage typical of overpressure from large explosions. As of the writing of this video, President Nicolas Maduro remains in U.S. custody, a president in name only. President Trump, the most powerful man on Earth, has promised to bring Venezuela, its vast natural resources, and its people under the beneficent control of the United States of America. Barring intervention by God or the devil, a new sun has risen on Earth. The new American empire is here.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6%.
So the old saying goes, there's nothing more dangerous than a cornered animal. Donald Trump has been cornered for years. Increased public scrutiny over a man who was, up until 2016, a national sideshow act, brought to public light a coterie of crimes and indiscretions going back decades into Trump's past. From business deals gone wrong to rape cover-ups and a deep personal connection with history's most infamous pedophile, Trump has known for a decade now the only thing keeping him out of jail is presidential immunity and the threat of political retribution for turning against him.
So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Establishment Democrats, corporate moderates, and disaffected career Republicans expected a slow diminishment of Trump's legacy following his disastrous handling of COVID-19 and an overall lackluster delivery on the presidential promises of his 2016 campaign. Following the election in 2020, Trump's desperation to stay in office and avoid repercussions for a lifetime of sins led to the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol and a host of investigations, prosecutions, and sentences handed down for impropriety of all stripes.
President Trump, meanwhile, campaigned in Pennsylvania yesterday. On the same day, another of his former close associates was put in handcuffs. Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon was arrested on fraud charges over an alleged scheme connected to the president's long-promised border wall. He was later released on a $5 million bond.
A longtime ally of President Trump, Roger Stone, was arrested overnight and in court this morning, accused of lying to Congress and of witness tampering.
Some breaking news out of Atlanta, where Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows has surrendered on charges related to efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The jail just released this mugshot. His bond is set at $100,000.
It seemed all but inevitable that, as Trump's Confederates, handlers, spokespeople, planners, sycophants, and co-conspirators fell, flipped, and began serving jail time, that Trump would follow in kind. But prosecutorial failures, interference at the highest levels of government, bribes, threats, extortion, and most of all, the complacent do-nothingism of Democratic leadership allowed Donald Trump to remain free, retain influence, and ultimately return to power.
Someone who is on your VP shortlist, Senator Kamala Harris, told NPR last year that the Justice Department would have, quote, no choice but to prosecute Trump after his presidency. Should you win, would you follow through on the many investigations? Could you envision him, a former president, being prosecuted if the evidence shows wrongdoing?
Look, the Justice Department is not the president's private law firm. The Attorney General is not the president's private lawyer. I will not interfere with the Justice Department's judgment of whether or not they think they should pursue the prosecution of anyone that they think has violated the law. But I also
including a former president.
It depends on what happens. It depends on what happens. I think it is a very, very unusual thing and probably not very, how can I say it, good for democracy to be talking about prosecuting former presidents.
The second Trump presidency has not been a return to form, but an absolute evolution from the first day in office. Vengeance, immediacy, and unrestrained pursuit of any and every goal have become the hallmarks of Trump's return to power. The institution of Doge, a make-good fiscal responsibility measure and favor to Elon Musk, the chief kingmaker of Trump Part 2, served to solidify Trump's hold on the government by stripping its ability to fetter his actions through force reduction, while also freeing up capital to curtail complaints about his expensive upcoming plans. Namely, an immediate hyperfixation on Venezuela as a narco-terrorist pariah state.
The Trump administration launched its 22nd strike on an alleged drug boat Thursday. The Pentagon says 4 people were killed in the attack. The announcement came hours after Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley briefed lawmakers on a series of strikes launched September 2nd. The initial attack left 2 survivors. Bradley ordered a follow-up attack to take them out, but the admiral denied there was an order to kill everyone, according to Senator Tom Cotton.
And today, there's some more fallout after the Trump administration invoked a rarely used, centuries-old law, more than 2 centuries old, in fact, to deport hundreds of immigrants to a prison in El Salvador. And according to Trump, all of those immigrants, or many of them, belong to a Venezuelan gang known as Tren de Aragua. Now, keep in mind, the legality of these deportations is still up in the air. It's still not entirely clear if everyone that was deported belongs to Tren de Aragua. But while MS-13 might be more widely known here in the United States, Tren de Aragua actually operates in several countries, including the United States.
The case against Venezuela began in the earliest months of the Trump presidency, when most people were still grappling with the new normals of a Doge-focused administration and the old normals of hyperfixating on the foreign genocide in Palestine. As with most of these campaigns, it started small, essentially metastasizing out of seemingly disparate and independent informational reports about Venezuela, its ineffectual and corrupt president, and the country's dependency on criminal organizations to stay afloat. Over the next several months, the Venezuelan prison gang known as Tren de Aragua rose from a relative obscurity to become the centerpiece of Trump's domestic and foreign policy, a tremendously effective decision on his part. Tren de Aragua, or Train from Aragua, a state in north-central Venezuela, is a pranato, or a prison gang led by a pran. The term pran is an acronym standing for Preso Rematado Asesino Nato, which translates into English as roughly prisoner, unredeemable, born killer. Pranes lead their gangs from prisons that serve more as state-sponsored fortresses than correctional or penal institutions.
Another thing that really sets Tren de Aragua apart from not just MS-13, but pretty much every other major Latin American criminal organization is how quickly it was able to grow across a large percentage, a large portion of the American continent. That is, in fact, a function of how loosely structured it is and how replicable the model, its criminal model, is in other places, and therefore how hard it is to kind of identify it.
Pranes often take over operations of the prison they're sentenced to, walking free at will, providing themselves luxury accommodations and conjugal visits, and conducting warfare against other gangs and even the government itself from within the prison's walls. In 2011, then Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez was forced to negotiate with a single 21-year-old Pran to end the 27-day-long Rodeo prison riots after the Pranes successfully frustrated the efforts of thousands of Venezuelan National Guard troops to stamp out criminal activity within the Rodeo 1 and Rodeo 2 prisons. At the time, Venezuela's prisoner population, a mix of political prisoners, gang members, and common criminals, exceeded 4 times the capacity of the country's 30 prisons, a reported figure of around 49,000 prisoners against the estimated capacity of 12,500. With the collapse of the country's economy now into its second decade, Maduro's government forces no longer had the power to maintain full control over the criminal element within Venezuela or its own prison system. In September of 2023, Maduro required a force of 11,000 security personnel to retake a single prison from Tren de Aragua. The Aragua Penitentiary Center, also known as Tocaron Prison, is only around 2 hours' drive from the capital of Caracas, but had fallen so deeply under gang control that Pranes had managed to install a baseball field, a nightclub, and even a zoo under the government's nose. Tren de Aragua's criminal operations had gone international at this point, and though retaking this prison was sold as a major face-saving measure for Nicolas Maduro, the influence of Tren de Aragua and other prenatos remained to this day. Maduro's incompetence, and now alleged complicity in these criminal matters, alongside his 13-year slump of a presidency, has left Venezuela ripe for exploitation in pretty much every way. Donald Trump and, more importantly, the strategic team behind the second Trump presidency and the successor presidencies that will follow plans to capitalize on those failures to make Venezuelan regime change the crown jewel of the Make America Great Again brand. The second Trump administration comes as an indelible punctuation mark to the old DC corporate liberalism hallmarked by 4 years of lackluster and fumbling leadership by former President Joe Biden. Despite any numerical successes that administration might have boasted regarding COVID vaccinations and economic growth, Biden's 4 years felt as unsteady and confused as Biden himself looked toward the end. Too old at the time of his election to govern effectively, much less survive a full 8 years as president, a decrepit and fumbling Biden was bullied out of his incumbent race in favor of the unknown and untested Kamala Harris just months before the 2024 election. She lost handily to Trump, a strong metaphor for the far too little, far too late style of governance popular amongst the geriatric Democratic leadership. What we're left with as a nation, for better or worse, might be the first actual leader in the country since FDR. Republican obstructionism in the post-9/11 era, a much more guided vision of leadership than the Democratic can-kicking of the last half-century, traded every progressive legislative victory for constant expansion of irreversible Republican powers. President Barack Obama's major accomplishments in office, pushing through the Affordable Care Act and gay marriage equality, were handily outdone by his failure to maintain democratic equity in the American judiciary and the complete loss of the Supreme Court. Donald Trump suffers none of the hesitance, none of the reservation of his predecessors. A shrewd, well-organized Republican establishment handed his MAGA movement the single most powerful peacetime presidency in American history, and he has used every ounce of it and more within the first year of his second great chance. faced with the knowledge that he's playing chicken with, at best, imprisonment by the end of his presidency, he has pulled out every stop to maintain, grow, and hold fast the power given to him by a corrupt Supreme Court and a feckless and unstable legislature. It's very likely Donald Trump considers the end of his presidency and the day of his death to be one and the same, regardless of how that might look in the moment. And to push that date out as far as possible, he will have to establish a new American empire, which does not just have him as its leader, but needs him. Venezuela is the first massive victory in this plan.
As everyone knows, the oil business in Venezuela has been a bust, a total bust, for a long period of time. They were pumping almost nothing by comparison to what they could have been pumping and what could have taken place. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
Shortly after hearing about Operation Absolute Resolve, I thought what probably anybody else with an American's familiarity with Venezuela thought. They have oil, right? This is probably about that. Then Donald Trump went on television and said directly, this is about oil. And in that moment, I knew it was about absolutely anything else. And a little research proved me correct. Nearly every report on Venezuela includes, to some degree, the phrase world's largest oil reserves. Now, that figure equates to nearly 1 trillion barrels of oil, and if you have zero familiarity with oil or the hydrocarbon extraction industry, you probably think that means there's around $60 trillion worth of oil in the ground. If you do have familiarity with oil or the hydrocarbon extraction industry, what you probably thought instead was, why the hell is it all still there? The answer to that question is Venezuela's oil fields are functionally worthless, and it's not simply an issue of international pressures or infrastructure. The oil itself sucks. You see, crude oil is not all created equally. Organically speaking, it's all made from different stuff, and those ingredients, the kind of earth they're in, and the time they spend cooking under the ground tend to create different qualities of oil. The variations are so economically different, barrels of oil from different oil fields fall underneath different benchmarks on the international exchange, the most common of which is the Brent crude benchmark, named for the Brent oil fields in the North Sea. The two most important factors in grading oil are its weight, graded from light to heavy, and its sweetness, or overall contamination with sulfur. That last rating goes from sweet, minimal contamination, to sour, high contamination. There's a lot of foundational science behind those deceptively simple terms, but weight and sweetness are generally all you need to describe any type of crude's position on the international markets, regardless of your country of origin. Weight specifically refers to the American Petroleum Institute's gravity scale, a measure of a petroleum liquid's density relative to water. There's a lot of math here I'm not going to explain, but essentially there are 4 classifications of crude oil: light, medium, heavy, and extra heavy crude oil. The heaviness in the oil comes from the presence of bitumen, also called natural asphalt, and other materials in the oil that increase the oil's density. Lighter oil is easier to extract, easier to transport, and easier to refine, so lighter is always better, but the scale isn't linear. The heaviest crudes are often much more bothersome to deal with than their lighter counterparts. On the second scale, the sourness of an oil exponentially increases the overall difficulty of dealing with it. Sourness directly refers to the sulfur content of oil, but really it's a reference to the crude's level of volatility. Sulfur is a byproduct of the processes that create oil from decaying organic matter. And essentially, any mixture of carbon, sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, and heat will create volatile organic compounds. These range from toxic, flammable gases like hydrogen sulfide to powerful liquid acids like sulfuric acid and other novel and dangerous substances. All of these risks are well known and accounted for, with various solutions to each discrete problem that might arise. But all those solutions cost money to implement. This makes heavier, sour crudes a higher risk investment than lighter, sweeter options, and Venezuela's Orinoco oil fields contain some of the heaviest, sourest crude on the planet. It is one of the heaviest and one of the dirtiest crudes that you can find, said Claudio Galiberti, a chief economist for Rystad Energy, in a January 7, 2026 article by Kamila Domonsky for National Public Radio titled, "The World Has Too Much Oil Right Now. Will Companies Want Venezuela's?" Gililberti goes on to opine that global oil trading benchmarks would need to rise significantly to make Venezuela's oil profitable to extract, suggesting a figure of at least $80 per barrel on the Brent crude benchmarks, which are currently at around $60 per barrel. That $80 price per barrel figure is a particularly unfortunate number, as it sits just above the highest average price per barrel figures for the last decade. This means the second Venezuelan oil went onto the market, its addition to the global oil supply would probably drop that demand below the price needed for production costs. In fact, Venezuela's national collapse can be directly correlated to the American fracking boom of 2013, which dropped Brent crude prices from a high of $114.30 per barrel in August of 2013 to just $30.89 per barrel in February of 2016. America's high output of oil since then has kept international prices fairly low, save for a massive spike in 2022 following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. All this meaning, essentially, that Maduro wagered Venezuela's entire future on a commodity nobody wants or currently even needs. The world oil market has remained in surplus essentially since 2013, keeping profitability well outside Venezuela's reach. And even if the surplus ended tomorrow, Venezuela's oil extraction and processing infrastructure is miserably incapable of converting the raw resource into wealth for the country's people. Venezuela's production rate lags behind even just the state of North Dakota, which crossed 1 million barrels per day before Venezuela's economy collapsed. Donald Trump has promised U.S. oil companies will go back into Venezuela and invest in rebuilding the country's infrastructure at his own estimated cost of billions of dollars.
We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
With the Orinoco oil field being a largely deepwater, offshore operation, even a paltry few billion will likely fall short of what could ultimately be tens of billions of dollars for everything from the actual equipment and personnel to install it, to modernizing Venezuela's infrastructure to a sufficient enough point to facilitate the extraction, processing, and security support a multi-billion-dollar industry requires. Sure, the investment would absolutely be worth it down the road, when enough of the world's oil supply has been depleted that Venezuelan oil ceases being a low-tier commodity. But Donald Trump has neither the time nor patience for long-term investments to come to fruition. So why do regime change in Venezuela? Why promise to invest billions to build up infrastructure for a petrol industry he can't clearly benefit from in the short term? One big, beautiful word: gold. In the south-central region of Venezuela, stretching from the eastern border with Guyana to the western border with Colombia, is the Arco Minero del Orinoco, or the Orinoco Mining Arc, a roughly 111,800 square kilometer region rich in minerals ranging from diamonds and gold to titanium and bauxite, which is needed for aluminum production, to coal and all sorts of other rare earth minerals. Under the Maduro regime, it has become hell on earth.
The Maduro regime has been incentivizing illegal mining operations in southern Venezuela since 2016. These illegal mining operations are fueling human rights abuses, are creating lasting damage to the environment, and creating multiple threats to Venezuela and the region.
According to a 2017 article in Earth Island Journal by Bram Ibis titled Arc of Desperation, Maduro signed an executive order in early 2016 nationalizing a 43,183 square mile section of essentially untouched Amazon wilderness into a special economic zone, opening the region to mining in order to defray the massive economic damage done to Venezuela by his mishandling of the oil industry.
Illegal mining in southern Venezuela is propping up the Maduro regime because it's fueling the Maduro regime with cash and liquidity that is much needed right now given the international sanctions. Also, the Maduro regime is using illegal mining to buy political loyalty among governors, mayors, military officials, among others.
Original estimates for the region include a possible 7,000 tons of gold, approximately $100 billion worth of coltan, a metallic ore used in electronic devices, 3 billion carats in diamonds, roughly 1.3 million pounds, but that doesn't equate to any certain price, and 300,000 metric tons of rare earth elements. Like nearly any other given number in Maduro's Venezuela, a country characterized by massive repression of independent journalism and censorship, there's no way for third parties to verify the given figure. In fact, the only certain way to know there's a great deal of mineral wealth being extracted in Venezuela at all are the steady reports of criminal activity, human rights abuses, and ecological damage steadily trickling out of the region. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, these mining sites, a mix of legitimate companies and criminal enterprises, served largely as a way for Maduro to maintain the loyalty of his own military by operating bribery and protection rackets in the region. Venezuela's security forces, so pathetically understaffed more Cubans died failing to protect Maduro than Venezuelans, are generally unable to maintain security in the large, wild territories in the country's south.
Y el oro se mueve en Venezuela dentro de una aparente legalidad que esconde una matriz criminal. Según un informe de la plataforma web InfoAmazonia, el negocio de la minería ilegal del coltán, por ejemplo, es compartido con la guerrilla colombiana que opera en la región de Paraguasa, con la participación de la fuerza militar venezolana.
The lack of influence left the region open to exploitation by gangs of criminals and opportunists both from inside and outside Venezuela, who have turned the most remote and mineral-rich regions of the Amazon into narco-terrorist fiefdoms operating on a blood gold economy. These armed forces include Venezuela's Pranatos, including the now infamous Tren de Aragua, large criminal organizations called megabandas, sindicatos, or gangs originally connected to powerful labor unions, and paramilitary groups called colectivos. Organizations like the National Liberation Army, ELN, and members of FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, operate in the region as well, crossing borders and using laundered Venezuelan blood gold to pay for and facilitate their own independent operations inside and outside the country. The Center for Strategic and International Studies suggests illegal mining activities in blood gold now account for around or over half of the operational income for FARC and the ELN, and that approximately 500,000 workers are involved in the illegal mining operations in the Orinoco Arc, nearly half of whom are underage, and many of which are essentially enslaved indigenous peoples from the region.
La consecuencia de la minería sobre los pueblos indígenas es la destrucción total de su cultura, la pérdida total de sus valores, la inversión completa.
La minería se hace en gran medida mediante la explotación infantil en condiciones de semiesclavitud, así como la trata de personas con fines de explotación sexual. El contexto de violencia, junto a la emergencia humanitaria compleja, han causado el desplazamiento forzado de comunidades indígenas hacia los países limítrofes, al mismo tiempo que llegan los garimpeiros brasileños impulsados por la minería.
These people are forced to work in appalling conditions and coerced into obedience through intimidation, murder, gang rape, and acts of mutilation such as cutting off hands. Use of sexual violence both as an intimidation and money-making tactic has created a series of extreme knock-on effects in the area, creating a culture of unobstructed sex trafficking of women and especially children, and mass outbreaks of HIV, AIDS, and other sexually transmitted diseases. The ecological impact of the mining has been no less severe, with unchecked and unregulated mining operations filling the Amazon rainforest and its aquifers with mercury, heavy metals, and numerous other serious pollutants.
La minería a cielo abierto es una práctica prohibida en muchos países. En el caso del oro, incluye sistemas de cianuración y utilización de mercurio que son potencialmente devastadores para los ecosistemas fluviales.
The Orinoco Arc comprises over 12% of the nation's entire territory, and from 2002 to 2024, Venezuela lost 680 kilohectares of humid primary forest, according to a report by Global Forest Watch. This accounts for about 2% of its total area of humid primary forest. Without serious intervention by a polity with sufficient military resources to gain control of the region and force of will to maintain it, these conditions will continue to deteriorate until the region and its peoples are fully depleted. This will necessarily include unprecedented ecological damage to the Amazon rainforest and the communities that depend on it for survival.
What I'd like to do this morning is talk to you through some of the preparation and the details without compromising any of our tactics, techniques, and procedures. There is always a chance that we'll be tasked to do this type of mission again.
As of January 2026, the book has largely been written on Nicolas Maduro, his legacy, and the failures of Hugo Chávez's brand of socialism to create long-standing prosperity and safety for the people of Venezuela, or even maintain the country's own regional sovereignty. Regardless of what that word, socialism, means to the outside observer, Venezuela is without reservation and by every metric a failed state. a failure founded on simple, predictable economic mismanagement and subsequently perpetrated by the arrogance of a single, despotic moron who was so incompetent at statecraft he got 34 members of a different country's police force killed, failing to prevent him from being kidnapped from his own presidential palace. A man so despised that the multi-million-strong Venezuelan diaspora took to the streets to celebrate his capture, and the general reaction by the world's nations, to include his strongest allies, amounted essentially to America bad, you're in our thoughts and prayers. This sense of the death knell of socialism is, in my opinion, the foundational goal of the second Trump presidency and the larger interests of the MAGA and Heritage Foundation members who form the core of his political support base. Politics, like economics, is a supply and demand game. Political capital, the trust, support, and cooperation of your supporters, is accrued and spent to accomplish goals. With Democrats and the more moderate corporate Republicans of the pre-Tea Party era, political capital was often accrued and intentionally not spent, usually as a vague gesture of camaraderie and compromise with the other side of the aisle. Donald Trump and the movement that spearheaded his reascension to the throne intend to acquire and spend capital rapidly in order to permanently change the landscape of international politics. Venezuela, I believe, is the administration's first fielding of the new American empire, an attempt to make America great again in the eyes of the world at large. Essentially a greatest hits, no-skips version of American interventionism, where the US intervenes at its leisure so long as it doesn't do anything especially distasteful. A wasteful foreign war isn't bad because it's war or foreign, but because it's wasteful. So cut out the waste. No occupations, no long-term boots on the ground, no piles of civilians in body bags, just drive-by diplomacy from the strongest military on Earth. The lesson American conservatives seem to have really learned from Iraq and Afghanistan is that political realignment of a country is hard when you've killed 10-some-odd thousand people and knocked out all the infrastructure just to get one guy. America does now, and honestly always has had, the ability to sap out most countries' militaries overnight and eliminate a head of state. Doing this while keeping those heads of state alive allows the US to conduct negotiations with an especially powerful hand, humanizing and humiliating a head of state instead of martyring them. Essentially saying, this helpless dork ran your country with an iron fist, but America treats him like any common criminal. Conducting a top-down realignment of a country this way might not jive with international law or propriety, but the obvious reply to that is, what did international law do for the people of Venezuela? What actual value does international law have if it protects the most despotic, wealthy, tin-pot dictators before it ever keeps some indigenous Venezuelan from having his hands cut off for a gram of gold? What can international law do to stop America from helping however it sees fit? Nothing. And that's the point of Trump's message here. The recent way of doing things has stagnated, and despite the problematic nature and failures of American interventionism in the past, this American interventionism is going to be different. And, as we can see, it already is. The ultimate plan in Venezuela is, in my opinion, to crush the specter of communism for good, essentially pursuing Kissinger-esque anti-communist policy without committing Kissinger-style atrocities. It's been a long time since the Cold War, and the fall of communism represented by dissolution of the USSR and the mass collapse of and/or capitalist economic reforms of communist states is old news. Where Kissinger's policies sought to frustrate the spread of communism through violence and proxy conflict, the new American empire of Trump's second term will seek to undo communism and socialism itself by unseating the remaining communist dictatorships and re-energizing the economies of the nations destroyed by their mismanagement. Treating socialism not as an equal in the game of nations, but as a lingering and costly expression of economic and political incompetence all too easily solved with subtle and exacting displays of force. No other country on earth is better suited to this strategy than Venezuela. Maduro has stood tall and proud as, essentially, the poster boy of socialist mismanagement of the country for over a decade now. His economic policies have led to starvation, mass exodus, proliferation of international criminal syndicates, and inflation so extreme the most valuable currency in Venezuela is blood gold. His reputation both in South America and abroad is that of an easily offended, censorious, and murderous jailer of his opposition. Outside of his unofficial support of narco-terrorism and human trafficking along the border between Venezuela and Colombia, he has no allies of any substance on Earth. Taking him was a perfect checkmate. With Maduro gone, two things are established. First, that any progress made in Venezuela from this date forward can and will be credited directly to U.S. military intervention by the Trump administration, regardless of the scope or veracity of that assertion. Secondly, that at any point the U.S. can strike Venezuela, or really any country, the same way and get away with it. Because there are no boots on the ground, there's no need for Maduro's successor to try hiding away in a bunker to let the country's people bear the brunt of an increasingly unpopular American occupation. If you're in charge of Venezuela after Maduro, you can live your life like usual, so long as you don't irritate Donald Trump. Unlike with, for instance, Iraq, the U.S. hasn't destroyed the military and thrown the legal system in Venezuela into chaos. The powers that be are still in place, but have now been assured that they are now answering to a different authority. There won't be outbreaks of mass looting, days-long blackouts, and months of unchecked crime attributable to the U.S., because the police in Venezuela are still operating the day after, just the same as they did the day before. Donald Trump has, essentially, done the unthinkable. He followed the counterinsurgency manual, creating a clean transition of power away from Maduro without giving the people of Venezuela reason or opportunity to foment a guerrilla resistance movement. Venezuela's government no longer has the monopoly of violence inside its borders, but it still has a monopoly over its own responsibilities to its citizens, leaving the government without an excuse to bail on daily operations to go play soldier in the hills. Trump is now set up to negotiate with Venezuela from a position of extreme positive influence. There is no grievance save for military forces, who lost, and from Maduro loyalists, who are now loyal to a man with no power. Trump can use this influence to push for corporatization of Venezuela's resources, enforcement of land leases and contracts, and essentially open Venezuela to business, which it desperately needs. If Venezuela's economy is revitalized, if the country is made safe and self-sufficient, and if its multi-million strong population of diaspora can return, then Donald Trump will have effectively shown American interventionism can and should be used as the cure for communism. At least on paper. Probably the most pernicious effect of this move is going to be the untenable position of being opposed to it. From a precautionary stance, sure, American interventionism has historically ranged from imperfect to absolute failure. But that argument has literally never dissuaded the American government, or even large swaths of Americans, from trying time and time again to improve other nations through various applications of force. And the thing is, as a nation, we learn and adapt new methods every time we try this. Iraq and Afghanistan were Bush, and to a larger extent, Cheney's kerfuffles. But the White House's response is essentially, Cheney's dead and we do things differently now. In a fundamental sense, power is power, and if a thing can be done, it will be done if motive and opportunity align. Without a substantial oppositional force, America, and any other similar such nation, will always use its military might to assert its authority, and no amount of snide, bellyaching, or scathing intellectual think pieces will dissuade it otherwise. If anything, by this point, it's clear the world must enjoy to some degree the dual issues of American interventionism and unchecked despotism, because the world refuses to do anything erstwhile about it. And this inaction of the world community against its despots shows Trump two things. First, that when time comes, you foreigners will lack the will to stand against Trump in any but the most pathetic and self-aggrandizing ways. You'll make your pissy little jokes and your jabs, and you'll talk about his fading health and his fuzzy mind. But the second he waves a greenback under your leadership's nose in one of those nice, big old foreign buildings, they'll rejoin the table with skinned knees and a soft, wet smile on their faces, and you'll whine, and you'll bitch, and eventually you'll get used to it. The second thing is that the world is full of people who want the same strong man the disaffected masses of the United States wanted. Somebody who'll come kick the shit out of the local bully with a smile and a fat fistful of coins rolled up in his hand. Over 1 million members of the Venezuelan diaspora live in America alone, with millions more refugees spread out through Latin America and the rest of the world. Similar figures are repeated for crisis zones and dictatorships throughout the world, many of which once prided themselves on throwing off the yoke of American oppression, but now teeter on the brink of implosion. Countries who've taken in these refugees will thank America for the chance to repatriate them to a safe country. Corporations with fresh access to resources will stumble over themselves to bribe their way to the front of the line. and in the end, better than nothing may become the terse reply to any would-be revolutionary. If Trump succeeds in playing out this gambit, and that's a dream in and of itself, but one that can come true as much through propaganda as real-world successes, then he'll have put his naysayers into a position where they'll have to tell the natives of a foreign land they don't know what's best for themselves. The promise of socialism is, to this day, largely theoretical and at best short-lived in promise, and the mismanaged failures of Maduro and his ilk have become a permanent albatross around the neck of anybody arguing for any variant of socialism. Moreover, outspoken opponents of Trump's move, if they aren't careful in their messaging, will come off as pampered, smug white saviors arguing against native peoples from a position of privilege. And politically, there will be no return from that moment. There is no surfeit of irony lost on me that my doomsday scenario for a Trump presidency is in essence the much-needed success of a foreign nation and its beleaguered peoples being saved from the mismanagement of a socialist despot. Without reservation, I hope the worst comes to pass in that regard, and the people of Venezuela can enjoy prosperity and unity in the hope of a better tomorrow, with Trump's intervention or otherwise. It is more a testament to the inaction and indolence of all other systems that such rot was allowed to fester until Donald Trump, of all people, gained such an opportune move. A move that, if successful, will afford an already too powerful man the path to an unthinkable dominion. The final takeaway I want to leave you all with is this. The era of can-kicking international liberalism is coming to an end. The days of speaking loudly without the company of a stout stick are past us, and the reality is thus. Regardless of how civilized and cultured and above it all you think you are, a ton of yapping no longer beats the price of a pound of gunpowder. Someday no longer exists. Eventually is a dream. Tomorrow is a promise. And today is your only certainty.